So next, let's look at the raise statement. So the raise statement actually allows us to raise an exception. And so we'll take a look at this by just trying it. Let's go to Visual Studio and we'll add a raise demo.py, and I'm just going to say raise exception and run it. And what you can see is that when we raise exception, it does exactly that. It causes an unhandled exception to rise, and we can raise any exception, or we can also set a message with our exception by calling the constructor, which allows us to add a message. And all this parentheses is doing is saying, hey, when you instantiate this exception, this is actually an instantiation statement. It'll create an exception object and throw it into the call stack. When we run this, notice that it says we have a hyperdrive overload exception. Python does not have inherent capability to handle hyperdrive overloads. It's just a message that we've created. So why would we want to do this? Oh, and also note that we can raise any type of exception we want. So now we have a zero division error, which is a hyperdrive overload. Why would we want to do this? Well, one example of this is, let's say that we wanted to make a contact info class. So I'll make a class which is contact info, and I've already had some of this typed out to save some time. And let's say that we want to have first name, last name, and email as the information. So we create our init method with that, and then we define some standard gets and sets. And then we get down, so we've gotten first get and set methods made for first name and last name. And then we want to define for our third attribute a set email. So following our standard template, we will do this, and then define our get email. Same way as we always do with the other patterns up there. We just get with email with self, and then return self.email. And then let's say that we wanted to get some contact info. So we'll make a variable and instantiate it as a contact info object. And then what we'll do is we'll say user contact info dot set first name, and so we'll say first name is equal to input, please enter your first name, and we'll put that into here. And we will do the same thing for three things: last name, and then email. So here we are getting the email from the user. We're setting the email to this email that we've gotten here. And then maybe we want something to display it all. So get summary of self. We will return a format string with self.firstname self.lastname. And we will display the email by using self.email. So this is just going to provide us a nice concise string so that we can say print user contact info dot get summary, and now that'll format it all for us. So it looks like this. Enter your first name, let's see, I misspelled it here. I'll try it again. And we can see that, yeah, it does a good job of pulling, our class does a good job of taking in the information, setting all the values, and then we can do this get summary to pull it all together into nice displayed output. But let's say that what we wanted to do is when we set this email, we want to make sure it was in the proper format for an email. Well, there's some tools that Python gives us to check formats that work out rather well. And there's this library called the regular expression library offered in Python. You can look it up in the Python documentation. And the regular expression library allows us to actually check to see if something meets a pattern. So, common uses for this would be to see if something meets a pattern for a phone number, for a social security number, and we're going to use it to check if it meets the pattern for an email. And in geeksforgeeks.org, they have an example here that shows how to do this. And it works like this. Basically, what you do is we need the regular expression library. So we import RE, which is the name of the regular expression library. It's built into Python. And then here, when we set the email, what we're going to do is, if it's check. So if it's valid, we want to set email, else, error. And so here what we're going to do is we need to define a regular expression for email addresses, and you can dig through. There's actually courses out there on regular expressions, and it's not a bad thing to dig through and get to. And there's all these pattern characters, which when you combine them together in the right way will match different patterns. And if you dig through this documentation, it'll explain it. You can also look up other tutorials. In W3 Schools, they actually have some tutorials on regular expressions. And this is probably a more concise summary of how this works. But eventually you get this string that you build up. And it's a pattern. And then once we have that, what we can do is we can say if re.fullMatch that regular expression that we just put into that string, and we're going to check our email. So we're going to check this email coming into this set method. If that matches that, then what we want to do is we want to do this. We want to set the email in there and set self.email to email. Else, what we want to do is we want to, make this an error. Now, the temptation would be normally just do this. Is just put a print statement here and say, hey, if it doesn't match, I'm just going to print. And if we run this now, let's see what happens. And we can see if I put a decent email in there, it works. If I put something that's not an email, it throws an error. So that works well. It doesn't set it into the class. It doesn't if it's correct, the right format, if it's in the format of an email, it'll set the email. If it's not, it'll display an error. But generally speaking, we don't want to input or output from our class unless that class is specifically being made to do input or output. Mostly these kinds of classes like this, where we're holding information, we want these to be agnostic relative to console applications and GUI applications, which we will learn later. So we don't want to do a print here, because if we were doing this with a GUI application, this print will not work. So instead, what we do is we raise an exception, and we can raise this in any type of an exception. Let's see if I put error. We could pick any of these errors to be the type of that we raise. Key error, tab errors, is a name error, is a type error. We might look through these and try to find an error, an assertion error, recurrence. Maybe there's attribute error. Maybe it's an attribute error. We could do that. So we'll say it's an attribute error. I'm not sure that's a good fit, and that's where the problem comes in. Is if you use predefined errors to raise, it may be correct, it may not be. And we can see it actually raises this exception, not a correctly formatted email address. Well, what we can do with that now is we can try this now. Put this in a try. And what we can then do is accept attribute error as E, and you can say print and now we're using our exception handling. Put a bad exception, not correctly formatted email address, which means that now this whole thing can be placed in a do another loop. So I'll tap it even one more in. It's inside of a do another. I will put here do another is equal to input. Please do another question mark. And now we have the ability to go through, and we're picking up this error message we put. It works just fine. And okay, so this is doing validation, allows us to do repetition. It works very nicely. We can put validation right inside of our set method so that it checks to make sure this is in the right format. Won't set it unless it's in the right format. And so this is working very well. But one of the things that would be nice is if, okay, the attribute, there's other things that could be attribute errors, and if we're catching that, that may not be very good. So it would be nice to be able to make a custom exception, and we can do that. So to make a custom exception, you just make it's actually, exceptions are a class. And when you take a class and you put a parentheses here, this says this is going to inherit from this. So what we're doing, we can make here some custom exception that inherits from exception. That means that this is an exception. It has everything an exception has, plus whatever else you want to add. Well, really, we don't really need to add anything to the exception class to make it work. We just want it to have a different name. So we say class some custom exception, whatever name we want, inherits from exception, and then we put pass, which means that we're not going to actually define any new variables or methods or anything for this class. It's basically going to be identical to the exception class, except it's going to have a different name. And so we can put that up here. And we can call this email format error, which inherits from exception. And we put pass. You can put pass there, or you can put pass here. Either way works fine. Since there's only one line, we often put it here. So now we have this custom exception. And we can put that in here, and we can now have this be an email format exception, and down here in an accept we can catch this custom exception. So now we have a custom exception which will be used by the contact information class, and if we get something that's not in the right format of an email, this will be raised and we can catch it in the main part of our program. And that's nice because we may want to catch other exceptions. And so we'll just catch our generic exceptions here. And then this, we don't even need this. We'll just say, please format email as an email address. So now we're back to our format using multiple exceptions, and we're catching that that custom email format error we made. Do another yes, and now it's working properly. So this is an example of how we can raise an exception, throw an exception, and then also create a custom exception to throw that we can then later catch, so that we know that what the error we're responding to here is this particular one that's related to the format of the email. And you can, whatever your validation code is, you can make a custom exception to throw so that up in the main part of your program, you know that that's what is being caught in the error. So in any case, that's how to raise an exception and how to write a custom exception. Thank you.